Okay, wonderful. So again, welcome both to Sonia and Eric, and wanted to introduce you. You know, you were here for the icebreaker, but this is the SNHU Business Vertical team. So we're super excited to have you here today. And Sonia, if you'd like to kick off with your presentation, and then we'll hand it off to Eric.
Okay, I can do that. Thank you, and good morning, good afternoon, wherever you're at. I'm going to go ahead and bring up some slides and share with you guys. So if you guys can just let me know.
Perfect. Super clear. Got it.
Okay, great. So I am a recruitment coordinator, technically an HR resources specialist with the U.S. Department of Labor. And a little presentation to share with you about our organization, some of the careers that we have, and information in terms of what we look for in terms of candidates. So DOL, our mission is to foster, promote, and develop the welfare of our wage earners, job seekers, and U.S. citizens. So we have a lot of activities underneath our organization. That people don't always think about when they talk about careers. OSHA is under us, which is a big area. Mine Safety is another agency that falls under us. Immigration, so when we have individuals that come into the U.S. and then looking for the ability to work, that comes through our agency. The management of workers' compensation is another big agency under Department of Labor. And Wage and Hour is a division that has a big benefit in terms of the community. They're the ones that look at, proper wages, proper work hours for employees, and then vets, another huge one across the organization. But we service the communities. Under Department of Labor, we have over 20 sub-agencies. So we are this big organization that's kind of small. So a lot of different areas, we have a lot of different functions, also means that we do a lot of different things. So when we looked at our organization as a whole, we pulled out what were our top 10 occupational series. And in the federal government, that's the lay of the land when it comes to jobs and positions. We often refer to them as the occupational series. And here in Department of Labor, you can see our top 10 listed here. So of these top 10, normally in an organization, it could be a quarter, a third of the organization because it's so diverse. In the Department of Labor, these top 10 occupations consist of over 9,300 positions that we have in the organization. And we are a total department of about 15,000. So what you have seen represented here is a big bulk of what we employ across the organization, about 2/3 of our workforce. So we are very consolidated across the occupations that we have. So within these occupations, these are all the agencies that employ that. So quite a few, everything from Bureau of Labor Statistics, they're the ones that tell you about, what departments are doing in terms of inflation, the market, those type of things. Benefits Security Administration, those are the individuals that help with pensions and health benefits. To the department that I work for, which is OSAM, we are the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Administration and Management. That's a big mouthful. But our HR falls under that area. And occupational safety is on there, workers' comp. So some ones that I brought up, but a lot of our agencies fall under these top 10 occupations. So it won't be necessarily, hey, you have a job, just in this one area that's always going to be in that sub-agency. It's really across the board in a lot of our agencies. So what does that mean in terms of students and academics? So we have taken those top 10 and we've kind of coded them with the degrees that align with those. So I do want to point out that all the orange ones align with a business administration degree. And the one in green requires any type of degree can be a qualifying factor for that. There are some that are pretty specific. The Economist does have a degree or a major in economics, and obviously our law folks do need to have that law degree. But we do have a breakdown in terms of different areas and those degrees that kind of align with them, just to give you an idea of where those top 10 fall. So when we look at individuals to recruit from those different areas, that's kind of the focus that we have. But we do have a much more comprehensive list, and I would be happy to share this with you guys, where we break down a little bit farther into other occupations and identify a little bit more detail in terms of degrees that align with that. For example, human resource management is really an occupation that has any type of degree requirement aligned with it. So for those individuals that have that type of degree, you know, they could do employment opportunity, they could be an HR specialist like myself, employee labor, position classification. So it gives a little bit more breakdown in terms of what HR positions in our organization align with those degrees. And the smaller one here, like I said, I'll share this with you guys so you can have it in detail. But any major general interests in our business administration, we have some additional courses. These aren't our top 10, but they are other positions that we have in the organization that align with that. So we'd like to share that so that you kind of have that crosswalk, because federal government is really strange when it comes to what we look at in terms of qualifications and requirements. Totally different than the private sector. So another piece, in addition to the resources that we have, I want to point out, if you're not familiar with USA Jobs, which is the place for every federal agency to find out about their jobs, is they do have the ability to do the search functions on their main web page. So keywords is one area that if you have an individual that has a particular degree, a lot of times you can sometimes put that degree right into the keyword search, and it will connect you with information that's in announcements that apply to that. Also, under the search tips in the blue button to the right, there are additional filters that you can search on. So if you're looking for a particular type of degrees or maybe backgrounds, certifications, there's additional filters that you can use to do those search functions. So nice place to start for individuals if they're looking for that connection of what I want to do with positions that are out there. But the area that I particularly like is the Explore Opportunities, which is at the bottom of their main page. And they have actually taken degrees and occupational areas and align them with current positions. So for example, if I was pursuing a mathematics degree, I can come to the USA Jobs and go under the Explore Opportunities. And if I click on mathematics, it will then take me to all the jobs that are open across the federal government that are aligned with mathematics. So it's a nice, quick, easy way if I'm really looking for a connection between my education and the careers. They do have that out here. It's not completely inclusive, but it does have some great search functions underneath it for individuals to do a little research. So we do have some employment resources available. I'll share the slides with you guys. But we do have a link that will take you to all the sub-agencies that I showed you, and we'll give a little bit of general information about what they do, because some of them are not as popular or well-known, but they can have great positions that are underneath them. We also have this link that will take you to a site that has some additional information, kind of like that sheet that I showed you with the education and the careers within the organization. But it has a little bit more detail in terms of the type of careers. So if I'm working as an economist with BLS, with labor statistics, what does that need, and a little bit more meat and potatoes. So a nice resource for individuals that are interested in the organization and the type of careers that we have. The major occupational categories, that's actually a continuation of what I showed you with those degrees and the positions. And then we have a link to whatever our positions that are currently open. This is the one place to go to and get whatever's out there right now. So some resources that we can share with you all. The last piece I want to share is I talk a lot to candidates, in particular students or individuals who are looking to come into the federal government. We do a lot of presentation and information and education on what we're looking for as federal employers in terms of get individuals into jobs and get them qualified. I came from the private sector. I was in HR and I struggled myself to get into federal government because it is a different beast altogether. And so we've done a lot to try to create some education and tools to share with the public about what they need to do to get through the process, because we understand some of the pain that comes with going through the federal hiring process. But when I talk to students, I talk with them about how to go out on USA Jobs and find jobs, what that information is in the announcements, and then what they need to put in their resumes to get them over that hurdle of applying. So we always share with them that a federal resume is nothing like the private sector. So don't use what you're using on the private side to apply to federal jobs, because it will not meet the level of detail that we need to have in order to consider an individual for a position. In the private sector, most agencies don't have any standards that they have to measure in terms of the candidates. It's subjective. Do I think you're the best person qualified the job? Yes. In the federal government, we have standards. We have the occupational standards, and those have to be met in order to be considered for the position. So different standards that apply, different resumes that need to be used. On the federal side, we like to see a functional format resume. So we're looking at basically the work experience from most recent to past. So not so much the skills-based or organization-based. We like experience-based in terms of the information provided and the format. And USA Jobs does have a template that individuals can use to help them format their resume in what we like to see on the federal side in terms of information. So I know on the private side, usually you get your resume in and you sell yourself in an interview. On the federal side, your resume is what gets you an interview. So that resume has to be top notch to get you over the hurdle of even being considered. So it should be the primary method for applicants to communicate their education, their experience, and the skills. And I tell applicants, if you would go into a job interview and say, this is why I'm qualified, and regurgitate all that information needs to be on your resume, because that is your selling point. It's not the interview in your conversation. We tell people it doesn't matter how many pages you need to do, just as long as you contain everything into your resume that we need to see. That's the bottom line. But we do recommend that they focus on experience that's relevant. It doesn't matter how old it is. It just needs to be tied to the job. So if people have a lot of experience, sometimes they may need to cut stuff out on the federal side if it's not relevant, because it's not going to be considered as part of the review or the qualifications. Federal side, we don't care whether you were paid, not paid, you volunteered for that experience. It can all count. So when I talk to students and we look at jobs announcements and look at what the experience is, I tell them Have you had a checking account? Did you manage your checking account, as a student? Did you ever have to review your documents and reconsolidate, what your balances were? You've done financial work. Take credit for that. So that, volunteering for community service, being a part of organizations at school, being a leader, dog sitting, it's experience, and we don't care whether you were paid or not for it. So take the whole road, take the whole picture, and include it all. There's really a lot that can be included if you start thinking outside the box in what to define. So put it all in there. And then on the federal side, how we determine whether an individual is qualified is based on really multiple factors. So not only is it the amount of experience, so how much time did I do that experience? That's very, very important. And that's why dates are very important when it comes to federal resumes. Most things are based on a 52 weeks level of experience. So if you don't have exactly 52 weeks on the federal side, you're not meeting that requirement. In addition to amount, we look at the level of experience. Is it an entry level experience? I always give the example of a cashier. Am I a new cashier being trained? Do I have 1 year of experience as that? Or am I maybe a lead cashier where I'm showing other people, or I'm kind of, a senior in terms of the work? Or am I a supervisor cashier? Those are all different levels of experience. And when it comes to the federal side, those are factors that come into consideration. Our entry level jobs are somewhere between the 5-7, usually 5-7. When we get into the 9, 11, 12, those would be more mid-level. Our 13, 14, 15 are going to be more senior. So when you apply to different level of announcements, the experiences required are going to be different depending on those. And we are very interested in what the results were of that experience. So when we tell individuals to write their resume for a federal job, in addition to you telling me that you have 2 years of experience as a cashier, we want to know what that meant. So, I have 4 years of customer service experience, and what happened? I exceeded, my survey results. My manager gave me I was recognized as employee of the year. That's another big piece that comes in with the federal side, is it's more than just what I did, how long I did it, at what level I did. We want to know what the results are. So I've done a lot of talking and I'm going to take a break and zip. And I don't know if you want to do questions now or if you want to wait to the end.
Yeah, if anyone has any questions, if you can write them down to the side, we'll have this this section, and then we'll jump over to Eric to talk through kind of that process after you get a position and security clearances, or throw that in the chat too if you don't want to forget it, and then we'll do the Q&A at the end. So thank you so much, Sonia. That was fantastic. Super excited to use these resources and definitely get that slide deck from you to share with the team as well. So thank you. And Eric, we'll pass it over to you.
All right, great. Good afternoon, everybody. Let me share my screen here. All right, so again, my name is Eric Hawk, and I'm the Regional Security Officer for FEMA Region 2, as well as the Regional Law Enforcement Liaison, which I was fortunate enough when I applied for this position that I got 2 full-time jobs merged into one. So yay for me. And I see
Eric,
some of the comments.
Is your slide coming up? For some reason, I can't see your slides.
Is it not up?
Is that a me problem, or can anyone else see it?
How about now?
Oh, there we go. It's coming up. Perfect. Okay. Thank you.
It helps when you click on the correct screen.
All good. All good.
So, I see some of the comments on the side too with the mine safety. That's my old world. I was an explosive ordnance disposal technician in the Navy back in the day. That was my first career, and then retired as a police officer from upstate New York. And so now FEMA is my third career. And so this I've been with FEMA for 2.5 years. This information I had to learn a lot about to create this presentation, because personnel security is only one little snippet of all of my security responsibilities for the region. And I do not get involved in the background investigations. That's personnel security at a headquarters level. But I do collect forms and create cases in the background software or database, if you will. And then the investigators pick it up from there. So without any further ado, we'll get into the slides here. And it doesn't want to advance. There we go. So I know that this presentation I gave it in a PDF format as well. So if this is shared further, I don't know if students may see this, but so I just wanted to give a little snippet on why we do background investigations for employment. And we want to ensure that applicants are suitable for government employment. When it comes to federal government employment, it's kind of a little bit different than private sector. There's international competition, right? And so there is always a threat of foreign nationals, foreign countries who have an interest in stealing information, exploiting information that are how our government works and things like that. So there's a lot, even to just be a basic employee with the federal government, there is background investigation that occurs to make sure that you're suitable. You don't have any quote unquote weaknesses in your background that someone with interest of getting into your knowledge base might be able to exploit. Say if you have financial trouble in your background, somebody may come and woo that person with money and try to exploit or elicit information, sensitive information about the government. So that's just one little example of why background investigations are done. Even if you don't have a security clearance, working for the government in itself is there's a need there just to vet people and make sure that they have a solid background. Steps in the process. So when I was first contacted to do this presentation, a discussion occurred of the SF 85, 85P, and the 86, which are forms specifically for the background investigation that comes down the road after your investigation is really on, the train is on the tracks and moving forward. What I do is initial forms when a person is offered a position. So what happens is the applicant applies for a position through USA Jobs, if you will, or a job fair or something of that nature. An initial offer for a position happens, and the applicant will be provided FEMA. In my case, FEMA. I don't really know what other agencies use, but we have 4 forms that are provided to the applicant to start the process, to start the hiring process, and to start the vetting process. And I'll quickly review those forms on the next slide. But the applicant then completes those forms and returns them to whoever the point of contact is that they should return them to. It could be security, could be human resources. And then an investigator receives the case. Once we, in security, we scan those documents, upload them into Integrated Security Management System, ISMS, and build a case for that job applicant. And then investigators in personnel security take it from there. And then they'll be contacted the whole rest of the way. They're contacted by their investigator for the next steps. So they'll be contacted by their investigator to get their fingerprints done. They'll be provided a list of facilities that they can have their fingerprints taken at, and then they make contact and do their electronic fingerprints. And then once it gets to that point, personnel security determines, based on the position that's going to be filled, the level of sensitivity, whether or not there's a security clearance needed, what level of security clearance. Personnel security will determine which of these forms, the 85, 85P, or the 86, would apply to that position. And then they will contact the applicant and tell them or ask them to complete that form. So we'll kind of get into that a little bit more as we move forward here. These are the initial forms that I or security managers in FEMA supply to job applicants when they're initially offered a position. So there's a declaration for federal employment, which is just a basic questionnaire about a person's acceptability for employment, if they have a criminal record, things like that. It's very basic. It doesn't go very deep. Federal employment screening and EQIP initiation request. EQIP is electronic questionnaires for investigations processing. So that's just to get the ball started with the background investigation. And then a DHS non-disclosure agreement, which says, as I indicated before, government positions, just by their very nature, have some level of sensitivity to them. So a non-disclosure agreement is the applicant signing an agreement that they will not disclose certain aspects of their job to outside people. And this is for DHS. It may be different for DOJ or DOD, what have you. And then a Fair Credit Reporting Act form, which authorizes the government to pull the applicant's credit reports. So again, I used the example earlier of somebody who has some questionable background with their finances. Maybe somebody who could be exploited for information down the road, and so that's why they do credit reporting on the background investigation. So here are the standard forms: 85, 85P, and 86. Like I said, these are the forms that come to an applicant after they've been offered the position and after the process has already started. Personnel security investigator will supply one of these forms to the applicant, depending on the clearance that's needed or the sensitivity of their position. A straight 85, SF85, is a low-risk position. It covers 5 years of background. When I spoke with personnel security about these forms, they told me it's recommended to collect 7 years, regardless of the 5-year mandate. I don't know if there's space on that form for that. I'm not overly familiar with these forms in detail. The SF85P is a moderate risk position, and that requires 7 years of background. The 86, as you can see, is a more sensitive position. This would include positions with a security clearance, and it goes back 10 years. But it starts from the age of 18. So if you have a college student who's graduating and is in this position where they've been offered a job, they would not have to go, if they're 22 years old, they wouldn't have to go back to when they're 12. They would start from the time that their 18th birthday. And then older people would go back the appropriate number of years per the form. So one big recommendation I would make to students or whoever is starting this process is to start their research and prepare in advance, right? There is a tremendous amount of detail that needs to be documented and reported on these background forms, similar to the resume that Sonia was just talking about. It's very lengthy. I think mine coming in here, I could have gone longer, but my resume was 6 pages long. So your background investigation for people that are a little older, going back 10 years in time, you need to list all of your residential addresses, your school addresses, your employment history, foreign travel, what locations you went to, the dates you traveled, who you traveled with, if you were in contact with any foreign nationals while you were on that travel, police records, financial records, full names and addresses of relatives and character references. And that's just to list the ones that came off the top of my head. There are probably more details called out for in these forms. It becomes very overwhelming if you're an applicant and you get hit with this form and you don't have any of this information prepared ahead of time. So I would coach people to start collecting that information, start talking with their relatives, and confirm that information is accurate in advance. It'll make the process so much easier. So the vetting process, once it gets to the standard form area where they're really going to do the background investigation, background investigations are done by the Defense Counterintelligence and Security Agency, DCSA. This came off of their website, and basically the initiation, the submission of the standard form electronically goes to the DCSA. They do the investigation, they schedule it, and then they hire an investigator, and it gets rolling, and then they adjudicate. And if it's favorably adjudicated, it moves forward, and a report is sent to the clearance repository, and then they move on with cleared cases. They move forward. So there's in my source up here on the top, it's a live link that will, although I don't know if it'll do it. Okay. It'll bring it to the DCSA webpage, which has just a ton of information on, this is public information. You can get all kinds of Q&A information, uh, just all kinds of different information on the vetting process and background process for jobs. So this would also be a good website for people to kind of look over if you're going to be coaching people on this process, et cetera. And then I thought this was a good graph to show, just to give you a visual reference on security clearances, the different levels of background investigation that are needed, and which form becomes applicable depending on the sensibility of the sensitivity of the position. So public trust, a lot of people mistakenly think that public trust is a security clearance. It is not. Public trust is just the lowest level of background that's done for a position that is a government position. It just says that you have obtained a level of trust, or your background shows that you can be trusted in a government position. You can see the tier levels are low. There is a high risk tier 4, which would be something maybe like information technology person who has access to critical maybe IT infrastructure or things like that. Still not a security clearance level position. So those are where the SF85 and 85P are used for backgrounds with the non-security clearance positions. When you move over to the national security side with red, there are 3 levels of security clearance in all of the U.S. government. There's confidential, secret, and top secret. Those are the 3. So these start at tier 3 for the lower level. Confidential is the lowest level of clearance. Secret is next, and then top secret. And there are definitions as to, the way they come up with these levels. I'm not going to get into the weeds on that today. SCI stands for sensitive compartmented information. Sensitive compartmented information. It's a special access. It's a type of clearance that is added to either confidential, secret, or top secret. So, and it's because of the sensitivity of the nature of the information that's in SCI, it's broken up into compartments so that nobody could just have all the information that's this sensitive and it gets leaked, and then really major damage can be done to our national security. So, SCI is compartmented by type of information, and then those special accesses are attached, if you will, to the side of, say, a secret or a top secret clearance. So top secret and SCI both require tier 5, which is the highest level, and but all of these require SF86 if you're going to have a security clearance. Another interesting thing to keep in mind is a security clearance is not it's not about the individual. The individual is investigated because it's the individual that's carrying that responsibility, but it's actually the position that requires the security clearance. So you could move on in your career to a different position that does not require security clearance, and your clearance is later going to drop off. So that's something that people mistake also. They think that they as an individual have the clearance and they're going to carry a clearance for their whole career, but it's really the position. So some do's and don'ts for these forms and for the process. Prepare your background information in advance. I talked about that earlier. Complete all forms in their entirety, and that's even our first initial forms to get the process started. And then later with the SF85s or 86, complete information is what counts. And a lot of people will either a delay will happen in their investigation, or you potentially could get knocked out of the box if you are not providing full and complete information. So that means like full addresses, that you can't have partial addresses, make it all the way down to the zip code. Just all information has to be complete, and all the forms have to be filled in their entirety. We as security managers, when we collect these forms, we sit there and we review all 4 of the initial forms to make sure there's nothing lacking, because what we don't need to do is then send those to personnel security, and then they have to send it back to us because there's something missing. So we want to make sure up front that all information is complete. It's a big help if people on your end, if you're working with people who are going to be applying to positions, if you can help even review packages, if you happen to be in that type of position, for completeness before it comes back to us, that's always a big help. We do, security guard companies do that. They'll have their security guards fill out the forms, and then they will review them for completeness before it makes it to us. It's just a big help on our end. I gave you 2 links for additional reference. One is the DCSA webpage again, and then one is the standard forms. It's the Office of Personnel Management, OPM website, and it gives you all the forms here. This is not to say that anybody, and this is one reason why I didn't include copies of the initial forms that I give out, is nobody should really be taking the time to fill these out. They change from time to time. A new form will come out that'll supersede the previous one. And a person can't really tell, I don't think, probably when they're applying for a job, which form they're going to need anyway. But this is good information to look at the type of, you could pull up one of these forms and see what type of information you need to include. And then that would help somebody do their homework and collect the correct information to fill these out down the road. So that, I believe, and I ended my presentation, but what's going on here? And that's it. So yeah, all I had was the 2 reference links and then a page with my contact information. So I would also say that I would make myself available if you have questions in the future about, my experience when I applied and came in to the federal government or anything along those lines. I'd be willing to field an email and provide some additional information as well. So that's all I have for today, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric. And such great information. I know, from the beginning all the way to, the offer and so on. So thank you everyone for your attention, and to our guests, big round of applause to both of our guests for these presentations and just spending the time to give us all this detail. So I wanted to open it up now for Q&A with our career advisors, and just, if you want to introduce yourself and what your role is before asking your question. Bonnie, if you want to go first, I saw your chat too, if you want to present that directly to Sonia.
Sure. I think I had it in there. First off, we've heard that every resume gets read. Is that correct?
That would depend on the organization and the application system that they use. When we started seeing online applications back in basically the 2000s, there was a big push for agencies to have these systems that looked for keywords because they thought that would be a quick way to be able to do the work. But it didn't work out. Our regulatory organization, which is OPM, came in and said, no, that's not what the law says. The law says that these are going to be reviewed. So a lot of the agencies that had that have stepped away from it because they realized they couldn't use that as the only system. But there are still agencies out there that do use that type of process where they have a screening in terms of the words in the resume, but legally they are still supposed to be reviewed by an HR specialist prior to being determined on qualified or not.
Perfect. Thank you. Then the next question, and I don't want to take up a lot of time, but I'll fire these off at you. Okay.
Sure.
I know you can take them. How about remote? Are the positions within the government on site, most of them, or are they just position dependent?
So it depends on the position, because just talking about security, there are some limitations on people not being able to do work at home in unsecured. What is great is last March, April, is USA Jobs finally implemented a remote category for agencies to identify positions that are truly remote. So now individuals can filter on that if they are interested in strictly remote. Otherwise than that, the organization's flexibility in where they're located is definitely opening up and changing now that we're coming out of COVID. So some agencies may not be fully remote, but they may offer the option to basically kind of the quals in terms of telework are one 1 day in the office per pay period. So individuals that can work in a telework can be basically at home besides 2 to 4 days in a month.
Perfect. All right, telework, you call it. Perfect.
Mhm.
Last two questions. I've had students that have worked in the government on through a temp agency, and they're like, that's the best way to get in. And then they apply for positions. Would you say that that's true or not?
It definitely is going to give them experience without directly working for them. So I do think that is a heads up. And I think it also kind of can help them with knowing how to do their resume, because now I have that direct experience. I don't have to connect all the dots that other people do. So I do think it is beneficial, but it's not always going to be a guarantee.
Mhm.
I personally love the student programs. If individuals are, a current student or somebody that's recently graduated, we have special hiring authorities for those individuals that really can give them a unique niche instead of having to compete with the general public.
All
So,
right, good to know. Okay. And that kind of leads me to my last question was our typical student could range, the average age 35 or whatever. And so working with someone that's 55
mhm,
and they're now moving out of the private sector, whether or not because their salary's too high or they're not needed, whatever. And now they have tons of experience. They're not your typical 24-year-old student, right, coming out.
mhm.
Um, would they be under this kind of program and would they be considered a viable candidate?
They could certainly be eligible to apply to positions under those programs because the eligibility for it is not based on any age or experience level. It's based on either your status as a student or your status as a graduate within the past years completing your degree program.
Okay,
So
so
those are
alumni is a year from grad then,
2 years.
2 years.
2
Okay.
years. Yep. So those are the eligibility. I will say that a lot of times agencies, when they advertise those positions, will focus on the entry level, maybe mid-level
Mm,
grade levels for bringing those
right.
individuals in, because that's just kind of the
Yeah.
bulk of the
Okay.
individuals. But we have a no limit on what that career range can be. So even if I do come in at maybe a little lower, I may have a non-competitive growth factor of, a GS-12, a GS-13. So I can continue to go up that career ladder and those grades without having to compete with anybody else for that opportunity. So, and though it may be a little bit of a sacrifice coming in, the reward
Mhm.
on the back end may be a little better.
Okay, good point. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect. And Aislinn, I saw your question about follow-up and networking, if you want to ask that to either presenter as well.
Yeah, I think really this is a question for both presenters because I imagine that the answer might be a little different depending on agency. So, um, first of all, my name is Aislinn, and I work on our non-cohort career advising team, which means I work with all students up to their last year of school and all of our alumni across all of our programs. So I have a pretty wide range of students that might be interested in these kinds of roles. Um, but my question is, in the private sector and nonprofit spaces, we often encourage our students to do follow-up at that traditional like 1 to 2 week mark. We're looking to, if you interview, send those thank you notes afterward, those sorts of touch points. And so my question is that still recommended in the federal space with the way that it's internally organized? And if yes, are there any specific formats or ways of contact that they're expected to follow in order to leave a good impression, whether that be written in policy or just sort of like a cultural aspect of what it's like to work in the hiring agencies in the federal government?
I can say every interviewer and hiring authority is different because they have their own personalities and their own ways that they appreciate things. I can tell you that when I applied, the gentleman who flew up from Washington, D.C. to give me my second interview was a retired Marine officer. So he very much appreciated the fact that I wrote him an email and thanked him for his time and for the opportunity afterwards. But you may have other people that it doesn't really matter as much, you know. But I would say on a professional level, that's always a good practice, is to thank everybody for their time, you know, be gracious and everything. So that's always a good recommendation, I feel.
And I would say from the HR perspective, it's not expected that that occurs in the federal government, but I do think, just like Eric said, there are hiring managers that greatly appreciate that. And as an applicant, if they're not sure about the direction, certainly that is a question to pose at the end of their interview. You know, I'm interested on what the next steps will be in this hiring process, and could I do some follow-up? If so, who would I follow up with? And then they could get some clarity in terms of, you know, what the process will be. Because in the federal government, I think traditional hiring isn't always the case anymore. And you may have organizations that are doing mass hiring efforts where you may have a group that's doing the hiring, but they're not necessarily the selecting official for that position or the one that they have to follow up on. So it can be some uniqueness depending on the organization.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Could I add on one from the last question about student employees and things like that, and then also Sonia just mentioned mass hirings. Before I came into FEMA, I mean, as a law enforcement officer, I took a lot of FEMA courses. I went through the Emergency Management Academy at the Emergency Management Institute, but I didn't know much of anything about the FEMA agency, right? Its employment opportunities. And I'll tell you, with you folks being in a educational institution, FEMA has, and maybe other agencies do as well, and I'm just not familiar, but FEMA has a really deep level of hiring modes, different types of employees. So, for example, you can be a student employee. You can do that, what we used to call an intern. But local hires is something I had never heard of. So when a disaster happens, a presidentially declared disaster, it's mandated by law. Part of the Stafford Act is to try to rejuvenate some of the local economy in that area of the disaster. And they hire local residents to be FEMA employees temporarily, 6 months, and then they have to be either be re-upped or either extended or let go. But I'll tell you, like our regional director of finance came in as a local hire. He had financial experience, but he saw the window of opportunity when I think it was Sandy came through New York. He applied for a local hire position, showed what his background was while he was employed in that local hire position, and then got hired on as a permanent full-time position. So there's student employees, local hires. We have a reservist program, much like the military reserves. They get called up when they're needed to deploy, but otherwise they're home. And then we have CORE, CORE, which is a disaster supporting position, but it's a 2-year temp, and then you get renewed every 2 years potentially. And then there's permanent full-time. And then even as youngsters, I had never heard of this, there's FEMA Corps. FEMA Corps is a voluntary young person's, and they wear FEMA shirts. And when a disaster occurs, they go out in the field and they actually interact with the public and they do things to help set up and all that stuff. And so I don't know that they get paid. It may be voluntary because it's a youth program. But what a great way to start establishing the trend towards federal employment. So I just wanted to kind of shamelessly plug FEMA there for a minute. But there is a lot of opportunity for employment in different ways that can transpire into higher levels of employment moving forward. So.
That's fantastic. And all these insights are so appreciated. I know we're about over time now. So in respect of everyone's time, if anyone does have any other questions, we have Eric's email, but if you have anything, I'm happy to forward it over to Sonia, or Sonia, if you're comfortable with me sharing your email with the team, just let me know. And I'll get the slides, and we have Eric's slides saved in our channel and Teams, but we'll get the ones from Sonia. And again, just so appreciate the knowledge, the time, and just so much value in having you meet with our team. So thank you so much.
Appreciate the opportunity.
Same here. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a great afternoon, everybody.
Thank you. Have a good afternoon,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye,
everyone. Bye.
everybody.